Viewer and listener discretion is advised. Continuing Stitches by A.G. Howard. 4. Cadaver. Clover and I were 16 and a half, and the collector had become a man. He looked to be 18 or 19, though I could only guess by the way his suits hung different on broader shoulders and thicker arms and legs. He still showed up each time in the mask that never revealed his face, and mittens that covered his hands. Pa's final dismembering had been a success, bringing us to our last meeting with our strange friend and business partner. I just laid out a batch of gingerbread men to cool so I could decorate them while we waited for his arrival. A brisk breeze blew through the half-open picture window, and the early sun slathered the room in an apricot haze. It was only Pa and me that day. Clover had taken Oakley out to birdwatch in the forest. "Did you substitute brown sugar for the molasses in this batch?" Pa asked after taking a bite. As a side effect of his tongue transplant, he could pick out spices and flavorings in the things I baked, and he'd lost the taste for liquor completely. Hadn't touched a drop in over a year. "I used both," I answered. "Just wanted to try something new." Pa nodded. I could tell by the crimp between his eyebrows he was troubled. Today we would get his final puzzle piece. Blots of red dotted the bandage that covered his left wrist and fresh stump. The blood looked like birds flying across a horizon to some unexplored destination. Maybe to carry some dead soul between the real world and the afterlife. Pa lifted his right hand to take another bite of the cookie. He had started favoring his right even before we removed his left. Apparently his cadaver donor wasn't a southpaw like him. His frown deepened as he chewed on the gingerbread man's head. I pressed gumdrop buttons into the other cookies while I waited for him to say what was on his mind. Maybe he was going to miss the collector as much as I was. Or maybe he was scared to see the money stop coming in. There was no reason to worry. We'd managed to live off only a small percentage of the $100,000, and the rest was in savings. Clover had found a job in town at the local grocer, and Pa and Oakley had revived Ma's vegetable garden, providing us with plenty of food with enough left over to sell to Clover's boss. I planned to get a job too once Pa was finally put together for good, although I wasn't sure what sort of job I was qualified for, other than baking things or chopping parts off people and sewing them back on pretty. I'd become good at making perfect stitches. Pa had been my guinea pig. "There's something I need to give you," Pa said at last after swallowing a swig of milk. He reached under the table and dug in his pocket, pulling out a small box and offering it to me. I opened the lid. Ma's bird-shaped diamond ring glittered from the inside of a nest of tissue paper. My throat swelled up. "Where did you find this?" I asked. She had had it on when she ran out the door into the storm that night. I saw it reflect the lightning in the darkness. Something inside me started to uncoil. Something teetering between numb and potent, like a snake that had been dormant. "This has to do with that magnolia tree you're so fond of," Pa answered, his gaze down. "The one with the gash in its side. Sage, it wasn't lightning that caused the wood to split. Something crashed into it. I had suspected that all along after seeing it the day that after Ma went missing. The tree knows. Pa couldn't finish. He started coughing as if something had caught in his throat. He guzzled his glass of milk and studied me over the rim. The sadness in his blue eyes scored me deep. There was more to this story, but it was as if his new tongue was refusing to work, as if it physically hurt him to recount it. At last I understood. All those months after Ma left, he looked for her. That was why he had refused to get a job. Why he'd go into town and stay away until he was skunk drunk. Because he could never find the answers he was seeking, and it was killing him not knowing. And he held it all inside himself. But that changed the night he met the collector. Pa laid his right palm on the table and stretched his long, delicate fingers. "These replacements have given me peace. The doctor helped me find your Ma again, and I finally did right by you kids." His words were cryptic and smoky, as if secrets singed the edges of each one. He took out the ring and dropped it in my palm, wrapping my fingers around it with his soft hand. You keep this part of her. She'd want you to have it. You're the strongest of all of us. Remember that today when you get the last cadaver piece. I slid the ring on, wondering if one day I'd have a bird indentation in the skin above my knuckle, like hers. And my chest twisted up tight. I'd always figured she'd come back, and now the reality of that never happening felt like a knife sawing my heart back and forth until it snapped clean through. I squeezed Pa's palm for the first time since he'd had the new hand. It felt so familiar, like when Ma would wrap her fingers through mine. Like when I first learned to walk. When I broke my elbow. When I had scarlet fever. The flutter of wrens outside the window startled me, and I pulled away. The collector's motorbike roared into our front yard, and Pa looked at me as if in a daze, then stood and left the kitchen to let our guest in. I put the finishing touches on the gingerbread men, drawing hair, faces, and tailored vests with icing. My hands trembled, and Ma's ring sparkled on my finger in the soft light. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something. Something I'd been missing all along. Something Pa's new tongue just couldn't tell me. The screen door opened and closed, and I waited for the collector to come in. But it was only Pa holding the ice chest. He left, Pa said, handing me a note. But this is for you. I unfolded the paper and silently read the words. Your family is together now. I hope at last we can all have the pieces we deserve. Pieces in place of peace. I'd read enough of the collector's notes to know that he had perfect spelling. The pun was intentional. I'm going to sleep now, Pa said, taking the sedatives with him. Wake me when it's over. He started out the door for the shed, but paused. Don't judge the doctor or the boy. They tried to do right by us. I stared at Pa's retreating shadow and then back at the note. My whole body quaked as I opened the ice chest lid and carefully lifted the cadaver hand to the light. There, on the left ring finger, was the dove imprint worn into the skin. I gasped and dropped the hand. I clamped my mouth shut, swallowing the bile that climbed my throat. The doctor helped me find your Ma again, Pa had said. Looking into his blue eyes, listening to that gentle tongue, it was as obvious as the scars upon his wrist, ankles, and ears. Both of my parents were inside the patchwork quilt of skin that now sat at the kitchen with me minutes ago eating gingerbread. The donor cadaver's identity was a mystery no more, and it was time to pay the reclusive doctor a visit.